Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano, and I'm going to tell you why keto is the only diet that allows you to build strength while cutting. So, what I just said was keto allows you to build strength while cutting, and you might not necessarily believe that, especially if you've never done a keto diet before, or if you are a bodybuilder and you have experienced cutting and losing strength. So, I've been bodybuilding training for about 7 years now, and keto dieting on and off throughout that period as well. And I've only recently, the last few years, discovered how to kind of add strength while cutting, but I've been doing my best at it this year. So from my personal experience and from research that I've read, basically, I'll explain to you the gist of what I'm about to throw at you. So a lot of diets, you'll hear people say, okay, you got to wipe away the initial claims of you need carbs because carbs are your only energy. So oftentimes the reason people lose strength on their cut is because their body's running on a glucose metabolism. So when you get rid of the glucose, it's basically you're on an energy deficit, right? You want to be in a calorie deficit, but not necessarily your body's energy deficit. So that is supposed to be the same thing, but just let me clarify here. So an energy deficit is what produces weight loss, right? Technically, when you measure it in calories, right? It's one of the primary drivers for fat loss is energy deficit, right? But it's not the only driver for fat loss. And this is one of my personal beliefs because keto inherently doesn't really operate off of an energy balance as the primary driver for fat loss. It's that ketone production that your body's making. That's the other driver for fat loss. So of course I believe that calories are the primary driver for fat loss. Of course I believe I'm not one of the people who says you don't need to count calories. You do. And that's the benchmark that I use to measure my progress every day. However, it's not the only driver for fat loss because there are people who don't count their calories at all or that eat basically in a maintenance phase or even a slight surplus and still lose weight depending on what they're consuming based on how their insulin responses are. There are people who eat one meal a day, and even though they're eating their full calorie intake, if not more from that meal, they end up basically increasing strength and maybe even a little bit of size, but also still losing that fat slowly and steadily because there are other factors that drive weight loss, right? There's of course the calorie deficit is the main one, and it always will be. And every time I preach a keto diet, I preach it to shoot for that calorie deficit. However, there are other methods which will also drive fat loss, not necessarily only the energy in calories, because there are other things like your blood sugar stability, and of course your insulin response. And if you're eating, example, only one meal a day, your insulin responses throughout the day will be much smaller, well, in the grand scheme of things, and a much lower blood sugar response on a regular basis, and higher ketone production, which is encouraging your body to build more of its own fats and draw from those fats for energy. So that's kind of getting one initial preamble out of the way. But the point I'm trying to throw at you here is that when it comes to adding strength on a keto diet, the reason you are able to do it is because your strength is not going to be dictated by how much food you're eating if you're doing keto properly. So when you are fully fat adapted, because the strength gain will only occur after you are fat adapted. I'll repeat that. So your strength gain is only possible after you are fat adapted. So if you are just starting keto and you've only been doing it for 4 weeks, you're not going to see a big strength increase. In fact, you might even see a strength drop because your body needs to learn how to do it properly. All of the studies on strength in people who are on keto, most of them do not follow fat adapted athletes. And as far as fat adaptation concerns you, when you are in a fat adapted state, your body's energy balance is technically not in a deficit in terms of your body's ability to create energy. When you're in a glucose metabolism, your body's energy is dependent entirely on what you're eating. Your energy on a fat adapted keto diet is not entirely dependent on what you're eating because it can always pull from fat for aerobic activity. So as far as the actual physiology of it concerns you, aerobic activity is very conducive to ketosis because ketones can be used for any sort of aerobic activity, so activity where you're breathing. Ketones are not useful when you're doing anaerobic activity, so where you're holding your breath and pushing and doing activities like sprinting, where you're sprinting full speed and you're using glycogen. As far as aerobic activity, like pushing weights while breathing and not holding that in, like you would be for sprinting, for example, your body can use ketones for most of that activity. Of course, there's probably going to be stored muscle glycogen in your muscles, and you also have the creatine phosphate system that's working in your body as well for helping you push heavy weight. The point is, your body's energy can be drawn from ketones for aerobic activity. You can look this up. I personally read that from The Ketogenic Diet by Lyle McDonald, which is basically the Bible of keto diets and how it works in your body. However, as far as actual strength gain on a keto diet works, from my experience, I believe it is entirely from the fat-adapted keto, because your body, example, even if you're fasted and you notice a little bit of a strength gain, for example, for me, I added 10 pounds, to my weighted dips today and hit a PR. So when it comes to strength gain on a keto diet, yes, of course, the most intense activities are going to be beneficial for glucose. They're going to be predominantly glucose, energy, and when you are not fat adapted, that's not going to be available to you. But when you are fat adapted, and the reason why you should learn keto and learn to get fat adapted is because you can experience a cut where even though you're eating lower calories, I'm eating like almost a 1,000 calorie deficit every day, and my strength is going up on some major lifts because I am, of course, getting nutrient dense foods, but at the same time, when your body is fat adapted, pushing those weights and keeping that strength up is going to be easier because your body isn't dependent on the fact that you ate oatmeal an hour before your workout. Your body doesn't need glucose, and it always has an available storage of energy, aka fat, in your body. So it's always able to metabolize energy and create aerobic movement. So any intense aerobic exercise is going to be not limited because you have a supply that is basically endless of energy that facilitates aerobic exercise. So because ketones are conducive to aerobic exercise, and when you are fat adapted, your body is able to pull from fat very easily and much more smoothly, you will experience less of a strength decrease even if your calories are lower, because all that really matters is your ketone production. And example, if you are in a deeper state of ketosis, so doing more of a higher fat focus, of course your performance is going to be better than if you are at the lower end, the lower end of the spectrum of ketosis. So what this might mean is you might want to increase your fat intake, right? Because I always preach that keto is not necessarily a high fat diet, but if you are aiming for high performance benefits, you might want to skew the fat a little bit higher, maybe around the 60% range. That's more my optimal balance of the percentage of fats in my diet. But even when even on days where I'm eating 1,900 calories opposed to my maintenance, which is around 3,000, even when I'm at 1,900 calories, I'm still seeing those strength gains. And that's because the conduciveness of ketones for aerobic activity. When my ketones are higher, based on what I'm taking in my diet and my macro makeup, basically I'm able to increase my incline bench, I'm increasing my weighted dips, I'm increasing my weighted pull-ups. And those are pretty big compound lifts. And even my single arm dumbbell curls have increased. And that's in isolation, of course, but when it comes to aerobic exercise and ketones, you can look it up. There's no problem with ketones being used for aerobic exercise. Of course, your sprint speed is not really something that you'd want to be training on keto, right? Because you're not going to see any improvements there. However, it doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be performance drop. As far as improvement in your weightlifting performance, in bodybuilding area of things, as long as you're not going for 1 rep maxes where you're holding your breath and making it an anaerobic activity, you can definitely see performance benefits and increases. So I'm down already like 15 pounds on this diet, closer to 20 now, and I'm still seeing steady strength improvements, slow but steady. So over 2 months of time, I've increased some lifts by as little as 10 to 20 pounds for certain max rep ranges, but in a couple extra reps on my max weight for dumbbell curls. However, I am wholeheartedly into the fact that ketones can be used for aerobic exercise and increasing strength performance in those aerobic activities. So what you should do is, if you're watching this video and you don't quite know how to apply this to yourself, what you should do is write this down. Basically, learn to get keto fat adapted. Okay? So if you're already doing keto and you are someone who is new to keto, basically you need to learn how to do keto to the point where you can do it for a couple months and sustain it. Okay? You don't want to be hopping in and out, because even though that is conducive for athletes in the short term, long-term fat adaptation is always going to be better, because even hopping in and out of keto when you are fat adapted is much more conducive than doing a cycling keto diet when you are not fat adapted. So you want to get fat adapted and then experiment with that on your performance. That's what you need to do. So that's my 2 cents, and that's the science behind it. And basically, if you want to learn more about keto and bodybuilding, let me know and subscribe to my page. Thank you. My name is Anthony Romano. Peace.